right, so we'll make up a little bit of time. We're a little bit behind, and I want to really try and stick on it for the folks that are joining for specific sessions by webcast. You can see our structure is, there's quite a few people involved. We have 7 permanent directors. Those are the principal investigators. We also have 4 directors that are term. So we had 4 volunteers for these positions. I'll ask you to stand up and show yourselves. Audrey, Dan Kraus, Olympia. So these are directors for term that have volunteered to help us out, and we'll take volunteers for the next term coming up. We also have 6 advisory panel members who Jeff introduced to you earlier, and we have 12 expert team leaders and 13 data team leaders. I'll ask you all maybe to stand up as team leaders as well and show yourselves. Half the room. So there's a lot of team leaders here, and these folks have been thinking about this for a long time. The original CANUE application was formed over a year ago, so the team leaders really have put a lot of thought and effort into the kinds of things that are being put forward for CANUE to work on over the next 4.5 years. Just a slight change. I think we're going to move the data governance and management team to a broader operations team, so you may hear both of those terms today. We have a biogeostatistics expert group and an exposure measurement group that you will not hear a presentation from today, but you will hear from all of the data teams as well as the maternal project team as well. They'll have a chance to give a few words during the plenary tomorrow, so you'll hear a little bit more about the expertise that these 2 groups can bring. The idea to start out with for CANUE is to really decide on priorities by consensus. And I know there's some skepticism that we can actually manage this with such a large team, but we're going to try, right? We might as well try first, and if it falls apart, then we'll add some structure where we put in, specific projects and they get reviewed at arm's length. But I do believe that we have the goodwill to create consensus. And want to just emphasize that what we're doing here over the next few days is building the strategic plan. We don't see this as a yes-no process, that it will be decided tomorrow and that's the end of it. It's really a matter of what can we do this year, what can we do next year, where's the low-hanging fruit we can pick now, how do we fund that? Is that something CANUE should fund? Is that something CANUE staff can take on? Is there staff or a grant that's already doing a piece of this? How do we really connect and collaborate to make the most of what everybody's doing and what CANUE can bring to the table? So partnering with other grants will be important, getting the membership expertise to people who need it. So we are going to revisit this strategic plan yearly, obviously. The priorities we come up with now might change over the year as barriers pop up that we don't see. So every year, well, what's working, what's not working? Oh, here's a new grant coming online. So this is really going to move and change as we go over the project lifespan. I think if we leave here tomorrow with some good solid actions and priorities for year 1 and maybe a vision of what year 2 is going to look like, that would be a big success. So the budget, what is the CANUE budget? This isn't the entire budget. I've just highlighted the budget pieces that will go directly to the research and data development piece. You can see in year 1, about half of the budget is going directly to that. We're on a short fiscal year this year, only from June till March, and we're spending a fair bit on this event right now, getting everybody into the room together, hopefully to forge the relationships that'll go forward. But years 2, 3, and 4, you can see that's a significant amount of money if we really collaborate, if we can find projects that benefit 4 or 5 different user groups. I think we can do a lot with that. One of the strengths, I think, is that we've focused on having some specialist full-time staff with CANUE so they can give support to projects across the country. I know in the past it's hard to get a programmer or a specialist for a 6-month or a 1-year project, right? But CANUE wants to have those people ready for you. We have one on hand, Evan Seed here, who will talk shortly for a minute. But we'll take feedback then from the membership as well on what we should be targeting for those other skills. We've generally allocated it that way. One thing in specific, the maternal fetal child budget is set. That was a grant condition, so that budget is already allocated and that team will be working on how to best deploy those funds. I don't think that's a silo. I think they're very interested, from what I can see, in many of the things that others are: walkability, greenness, air quality. So I think there's still going to be a lot of cross-pollination between those groups, but just that those ones will be focusing on applying them into the maternal, fetal, and child health area. And no student support this year, but as we ramp up, there's good money for students as well. So prioritizing activities will be important. I think what CANUE will be looking for are those that have big benefits, right? Exposure data development or enhancement. We're a national consortium. We want to see exposure metrics that are standard across Canada. That's not one exposure metric fits all. It might be a list of 20 walkability exposure metrics, but standardized spatially. We want to support novel studies, look for even proof of concept studies or a methodology. You know, if you can develop a method for a metric, then maybe CANUE staff can take that and expand it, right? If you can support multiple teams, that's obviously so much the better. And wherever we can complement, collaborate, or leverage any other funded research in this area that seems to make a match, again, that's something we're looking to do. We need to make that budget squeeze as far as it possibly can, and there's enough there to do some really meaningful work if we keep that in mind. So looking for those quick wins, high benefits, lower cost efforts. So with that, I'm going to switch it over to Evan. He'll give us a couple of quick slides on data, and then Paul Demers will give us the final words.
So as you can see, I'm the first hire for CANUE, which is, I think, the interesting part of this is there's a couple aspects of data that I think that we're going to look at, and that being, I'm a sort of the geospatial expert, so I think the cool thing for me is that being a geospatial data geek, we're going to be able to develop some new data. The second part, I think, is sort of put the call out right now, the idea that if you can think of any of the geospatial data sets in particular in the next year that you may have in archives, things like that you wish to contribute, that's one of the things we really want to sort of push in this first year. And again, sort of future data as well. So CANUE will provide the data documentation and the management. So CANUE staff will actually be developing, leading the metadata. So that's an important aspect of that. So this idea is to have standard information that's available for these data sets. So again, so start thinking about that in terms of some of the data that you may have that you can actually contribute for that. And then this follows through with the data catalog that we're developing. So I think the key point here to remember is that we won't be providing downloadable data. You actually have to request it. But one of the things we're doing is having standard metadata and conditions of use. So there's a draft copy there of some of the things you should be thinking about in terms of the actual use agreement, so terms of use that you may wish to take a look at. And this is just an example of, up on the website, some of the things we have for conditions of use, the time range of the data and things like that. So that's the section with that. Paul.
Thanks, Evan and Eleanor. Good to see you all. Good to see a lot of people I haven't seen in a while. So you may notice that in the original organization chart there was a data governance and management team that's now been broadened out to be called kind of an operations advisory team to reflect the fact that we need to have support across both the platform building elements of CANUE as well as the network building elements of CANUE. So certainly there is a lot of work to be done in this area of developing policies and support for data sharing, and I like everybody to take a look at the kind of data sharing example thing that's in people's package that's there, and send us any comments you might have. The idea is to build something that is very flexible, that both increases our ability to do research and to have impact research. So this is just a document just to get the conversation started and to get more input from folks. One of the things that we did want to stress here is that we will be, protecting authorship or intellectual property here, that the idea is to create a very flexible system for doing this, where the rules for the use of this are actually developed by the owner, but the use of it is actually facilitated by the platform. So a big task ahead of us. The other area that, in terms of kind of network policies and support that we're going to be starting off with, is really the idea that the CANUE is meant to build capacity. When you look at our full budget, we have just a small amount set aside for professional development, but we'll be looking for advice on that. Again, inside the package, there's a small survey to kind of help us out with that, and I encourage people to take a look at that. It's very short. You can hand it to any of the, to myself or Eleanor or Evan or any of the other folks that are around, so we can collect those. The other idea is to think about what we can do in terms of supporting student travel and issues like that. So there are a lot of things to get going fairly fast on with this. We didn't want to take too much time today, but just to kind of remind people that the platform, the idea of it is really broadly to have two different ways to kind of access data. One is that you can connect to data that can be exposure data that can be used alone, or that the user through agreements can actually connect into their own data. But also the second mode is that we will be pre-linking this data, or much of this data, we hope, into some of the major cohorts to really facilitate the use of that. And that's a bit of a segue to our next team that's going to be coming up, which is our integrated health team. So thank you very much.